brain, and it receives all the signals that help regulate body's internal environment through our autonomic nervous system. It influences heartbeat, blood pressure, appetite, body temperature, and water balance. It also controls the glandular secretion of the pituitary gland called hypophysis, a small gland about 1 cm in diameter connected to the hypothalamus by a stalk-like structure which has two portions, posterior and pituitary and anterior pituitary. Hormones from pituitary gland are secreted into bloodstream and delivers them to specific location. As an example, for cells and tissue, growth hormones are being released. For thyroid-stimulating hormone, it is released to the thyroid. Adrenocorticotropic hormone are released to the adrenal cortex. Prolactic hormone are released to the mammary glands, and gonadotropic hormones are released to the ovaries testes. There are also hormones that affect other glands, such as gonadotropic hormone, as an example, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Both hormones stimulate the gonads, which is testes for males and ovaries for females, to produce gametes and sex hormone. While adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates adrenal cortex to produce cortisol. Thyroid-stimulating hormone stimulates thyroid to produce thyroxine and tridothyronine.
There are two types of pituitary gland, which are posterior and anterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary secreted hormones such as ADH and oxytocin. Both of the hormones are stored in the axon terminal and released into the bloodstream of the posterior pituitary. ADH is the antidiuretic hormone, which the function is to against urination. This hormone is released by the pituitary gland when the blood is too concentrated. When it reaches the kidney, it causes the kidney to reabsorb water until the blood becomes dilute. When the blood is already diluted, the ADH is no longer released. The oxytocin is the hormone that stimulates the contraction of uterus wall during labor. The next is the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary produce the hypothalamic releasing hormone and hypothalamic inhibiting hormone by neurosecretory. The hypothalamic releasing hormone stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete thyroid stimulating hormone, while the hypothalamic inhibiting hormone prevents the anterior pituitary from secreting prolactin.
The next one is anterior pituitary hormones not affecting other glands. There are 3 hormones produced by anterior pituitary that do not affect other endocrine glands, which are PRL, prolactin, MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, and GH, growth hormone. So the first hormone is prolactin. It is produced in quantity only after childbirth. It causes the mammary glands in the breast to start develop and produce milk. Also, prolactin plays a role in carbohydrate and fat metabolism. The second hormone is MSH. It causes skin color changes in fishes, amphibians, and reptiles, having melanophores, and the concentration of this hormone in human is very low. The third hormone is growth hormone GH, or we also can call it as somatotropic hormone. It promotes skeletal growth, muscular growth, and fat metabolism. And we have to know that the amount of GH produced is greatest during childhood and adolescence. So what will happen if that person have too little amount of GH or too much amount during childhood? So if too little GH is produced, then the person will experience pituitary dwarfism, and such children will also have problems with low blood sugar or hypoglycemia. Meanwhile, if that person has too much of GH being secreted during childhood, the person may become a giant, where the giant usually have poor health because elevated GH cancel out the effect of insulin, promoting diabetes mellitus. If GH is overproduced in the adult, then that person will experience a condition called acromegaly, which means the enlargement of bone in face, fingers, and toes. This happens because long bone growth is no longer possible in adults. You know that human GH are sold as a fountain of youth, as it can help the adults to reduce weight, gain muscle, and also reduce the effect of aging. Even several professional actors and athletes have admitted to using human GH to reduce the body fat and build muscle. And we have to remember that this GH, human GH, is not a steroid. Despite of its benefit, using human GH has its own side effect such as joint and muscle pain, high blood pressure, and also diabetes mellitus.
Do you guys know how the hypothalamus communicates with the endocrine system? Let me explain about it. The hypothalamus communicates with the endocrine system via the pituitary gland. We should know that two hormones produced by the hypothalamus, which are ADH or vasopressin, and also oxytocin hormones, are stored in the posterior pituitary. Meanwhile, several others are produced by the anterior pituitary in response to hypothalamic releasing factors that reach the anterior pituitary via a portal system. Now, I would like to explain how some hormones are regulated by negative feedback and some are regulated by positive feedback. For negative feedback, it happens in both posterior and anterior pituitary. One example of hormones that is secreted by the posterior pituitary and is controlled by the negative feedback is the ADH hormones. As we all know, the ADH hormone maintains stable conditions and homeostasis in our body. When the level of salt is higher than the level of water in the blood, that is when the ADH is released to dilute the blood. The effect of ADH hormone shuts down the release of that particular hormone after the blood is diluted. Next, let me show you the diagram for the hormones that are secreted by the anterior pituitary and are also controlled by the negative feedback. The hormone that exerts negative feedback here are the T3 and T4 hormone 3. In the endocrine system, the target gland hormone T3 and T4 inhibits release of hormone 2, which is TSH, from anterior pituitary and also inhibits release of hormone 1 from the hypothalamus. Here we can see that the last hormone in the sequence exerts negative feedback control over the secretion of the first two hormones. In contrast, an example of hormone that is secreted by the posterior pituitary but is controlled by the positive feedback is oxytocin hormone. Oxytocin stimulates the uterine or uterus muscles to contract during childbirth. The more the uterus contract means that the more oxytocin are caused to be released. This shows the positive feedback mechanism that regulates in the endocrine system.